Welcome to the Community Homeworks Workshop this evening. We're so glad that you're joining us tonight. My name is Tiana Harrison, and I'm the Education and Volunteer Coordinator at Community Homeworks. If you're watching this live, please feel free to comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you would like to join in on the discussion or ask questions, please put that in the comment section as well. If you're watching this after the live broadcast, we are still happy to answer your questions. It just may take us a little longer to respond. Community Homeworks is a nonprofit organization with a mission to empower homeowners to maintain safe, sustainable, and dignified homes. We get our fundings from grants and donations, so if you find value in this workshop tonight, we encourage you to donate on our website at communityhomeworks.org. Tonight's workshop is entitled Spring and Summer Maintenance. And of course, we are joined by none other than our instructor, the magnificent Mr. Lee Taylor. So, Mr. Taylor, thank you so much for being here. We look forward to learning more about spring and summer maintenance.
So, yeah, spring summer maintenance is one of those classes that over the years has been really broken down into a lot of other classes. So some of the stuff I'm going to be just touching on tonight are actually expanded on more. So in other classes, I'll make sure I let you know with that. Everybody got an outline you can kind of follow along with. And, as we're going, ask questions. If you got them, we can hopefully answer them. And if not, I can look and figure out what what it is I need to brush up on. So we're going to be talking about tonight is just, what all those little things that you kind of want to work on once spring, summer actually kicks in. We were talking about gardening tools, how to repair and maintain your gardening tools. This helps save money. We'll be talking about touching on fertilizers and weed control and all those. That's one of those classes that actually got broken up into lawn care. And how to, care for and maintain your gardens and stuff like that. Mulching, landscaping material, fencing, painting stains. That's another class that got pulled out of this one. Doing your decks, maintaining your wood decks, screens, gutters, ladder safety, and I'm going to throw one other thing in there that's not in the outline. A bit of weatherization. And you wouldn't think that you'd need that in the summer, but we'll touch on that too. So, and like I said, as we're going along, you got a question on something, we'll try to stay on track, but we'll see. So, as far as hoses, we're actually into the time where we're actually going to be getting our hoses out and potentially using them. We got a bit of a dry spell going on. Usually what I'll say is, if you've stored your hoses over the winter, great. We talk about that in fall, winter maintenance, how to store them and stuff. If you didn't get a chance to do some repairs on them, a lot of times summer can be rough on hoses. You may get the car backed over it or the lawnmower hit it or whatever. And you were like, I'll just deal with it in the spring and stuff. So a lot of people think they need to go out and buy a new hose. You get little damages like this or something along that line. And you don't really need to do that. If the hose is in good shape, what I mean by that is it's not one of those grouchy hoses where you look at it wrong and it kinks on you. It's still subtle and supple, and it can not necessarily kink up, but it just may have a little bit of damage. You have a whole bunch of ways to be able to repair that, whether it's, male or female ends you can couple on, if the hose is actually cut, like that damage there. You have little couplers you can do. So, instead of buying a whole new hose, sometimes just going out and getting the parts and, simple cut, a couple clamps, and you actually can save that hose. So that's something to keep in mind. And he said, if you're having to buy a new hose, don't just automatically chuck the old hose out, because usually there's a part that's decent. And, what I'll say is, if you have a hose that, you just don't want to tackle necessarily repairing or something, and let's say you have like a female end like this, and you have, say, 4 or 6 feet of hose that's decent, cut that off and keep it. Because if you have a water heater, which most people do, it's a good way to use. It's a good thing to use to be able to drain that water heater out when it comes time for that sort of maintenance. So, just keeping your hoses in decent shape or repairing them. If you do go out and buy hoses, please, please, please don't buy the cheapest hose you can possibly find, because that's what you'll get. Usually I like mid grade, mid price range. If you get the really inexpensive hoses, it may last a season, maybe, and then they're kinking on you and you're screaming and yelling at it and everything else. So it's one of those things where buy a halfway decent hose, treat it nice, and you're going to have that hose for quite a while. So also, to think about, and this is usually early spring, are the actual sprinklers that you're going to be using if you're using sprinklers for your garden or your yard or whatever. A lot of them now are going to plastic. There's not much wrong with plastic. Some people like the brass ones and whatnot. I just hook them up and make sure they're working. Sometimes you may have, like a bent stake. If you have a metal stake, this type, the impact type, a lot of times this is halfway decent, but this gets bent. Well, sometimes you can just go ahead and unscrew this and be able to put a new one on. That's a personal preference. Me personally, I like the simpler the better. Little guys like this, you can run a truck over it and it doesn't really do much to it. I have one at home that I've had for many, many, many years, and it's just a simple little concave hole in the thing, and it just sends out a nice little mist, and that thing doesn't care what happens to it. It just keeps chugging along. So one of these, they sell them. They're usually, so with the way stores are, they're usually down low. The stuff that they get a better price on are at eye level. Yeah. So, if you're looking at those, sometimes, like I said, sometimes simpler is better. Think about the area you want to be able to cover, and, just kind of what you want to be able to do with it. I find those things at garage sales all the time. So, they're nice. So, but think about your sprinklers and, how you're going to be watering, or what you're going to be watering. On that note too, a lot of times you have flowers and whatnot, and I like those wands that send out to the shower stream that are about that long, so I don't have to bend over. So just details like that. On that note too, when you're checking your hoses, check the washers in your hoses, and change those out if they're getting brittle or something along those lines. Again, you're just trying to be prepared for that time of year. Your lawnmowers, we had that class last week. If you haven't done your lawnmower maintenance, like I said, now is the time to do that, especially if normally you're going to be doing this a little earlier in the season. Right about now is about the worst time if you have an issue where you need to take it into the shop, because, again, you have 30 or 40 other people that are having the same issue, and you get to wait in line. So the earlier the better, as far as doing that maintenance that we were talking about last week, and that way you can figure out if there is a bigger issue that you need to take it into the shop. At the same time, if you have winter tool or winter power tools like snowblowers and stuff like that, go ahead and get those ready for their summer sleep. So as far as the tools, the hand tools and the rakes and the shovels and all this sort of stuff, so I want to point this guy out here. So how many people have good old wooden handled, doesn't matter, rakes, shovels, whatever, right? And a lot of people say, I don't like the wooden handle because they break. Well, and they do, and they're right. But if you have wooden handled tools and they're starting to look like this, they've been out and watered one too many times and they're starting to get splintery and everything else, I'll just get a little bit of sandpaper and do a light sand on it. If it's, if it's really splintery, do a real light sand on it, get some boiled linseed oil, and I just put it on a rag and wipe it down. The drier it is, the more it's going to suck out. And what it does is it'll feel oily at first, but over a couple of days, it's going to soak into that wood. And it makes it so that it's a little more waterproof and a lot more durable. And it said boiled linseed oil is super cheap, a lot cheaper than buying a brand new shovel or whatever. So any wooden handled tools that you have, even, like hammers and stuff. So a lot of people have hammers with a wooden handle and they get dried out and they start shrinking down. You can put that on and we'll swell that wood up a little bit and make it so it fits in that head. So, linseed oil for wooden handled tools is really nice. It will darken them up, but like I said, usually it's a once a year thing and you're in good shape. So that's a nice way to do it. And you can see I just put a quick shot on this. A lot of times I'm just pouring stuff onto a rag, slathering on there and letting it sit for a while. So, but yeah, wooden handled tools, it doesn't matter what they are. They like that. So, like I said, linseed oil is a really nice way to be able to bring some life back to those. As far as the shovels and, rakes and whatnot, a lot of times what happens is, this part ends up getting a little bit loose. And again, back to that linseed oil. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll let it soak down in. I'm going to knock the light out. I'll let it soak down in, into that metal. And sometimes that will swell it up a little bit and help it hold on. You can also drill a hole into it and run a screw. Just something simple. But you can really, make these last quite a while. I'm going to put this back here so I step on it. So, I mean, just looking at those things, rake or shovels and whatnot, sometimes they, the more they get used, the more they get dinged up and whatnot. So a file or something along that line works.
What to do with the rags after you have boiled linseed oil?
Oh, you throw them in a big pile? No. That is something to keep in mind. Thank you. So any oil-based product, it's usually why I use paper towel. You want to set it out so it dries and doesn't spontaneously combust on you, especially in a hot garage or shed or something like that. Don't throw them into a garbage bag. Lay them out, let them dry, lay them over a sawhorse, something, because they will. So you got to be careful with that. I'm not going to get into the whole story of the floor finishing fiasco that I saw once. So, but yeah, any oil-based product, you have to really let those things dry out. But yeah, any of those garden tools that you use, like I said, shovels usually are the ones that get beat up the most. I've even gotten a hammer out and beat it flat again or whatever, because it hit a rock or something along that line last season. Sometimes a quick file on the edges will make it so that it's gonna be able to work a little better. With those oily rags, it doesn't hurt to wipe a little bit on the metal. You got to watch it a little bit, but sometimes that will help with that corrosion. You got to watch it though. You don't want to be necessarily introducing that stuff to the plants, right? I don't know if linseed oil would mess with them or not. See, something to think about, right? So, right, that's why I'm like, well, there's a Google search for you, right? All right. And any of your other power tools that you're going to be using, whether it's power washers or hedge trimmers or whatever, you get those things out, making sure they're working good, sharpening them up. That's always a big one. The other tools, and these are just handheld versions, and you have this in your garden tools. You have two different styles of pruners. So these are handheld versions. You can get loppers with the big old long handles. You have, I'm going to get out front here. Yeah. So you have one that's called an anvil style. This is where you have a blade that actually cuts right down onto this flat part. pass these guys around. That style is used for cutting like dead, or they call it deadwood. So if you have roses or something and it has 2 or 3 years worth of growth and it's not necessarily green wood anymore, that's the kind of that you would use. You don't really want to use that on green wood or growing wood because it'll crush it, right? Yep. And as soon as it crushes it, it's done. So a lot of times, I don't even own a pair of those. I have what are called bypass, where the cutter actually bypasses this fixed point here. And as long as this is sharp, if it's not, it's really easy to fix. You can take this little nut off right here and take this off and sharpen it up just like you do a regular knife blade. But if you have a nice sharp blade, it's going to make a nice clean cut, and it's not going to necessarily crush that and introduce pests and bugs and disease and everything else. So, making sure those are good. If you need to sharpen them up, sharpen them up. Huh? So you'll see there's a little nut, and you just take that nut off and you pull it apart. And then you can just, you can use a file, you can use a sharpening stone, whatever, something, yeah. Doesn't really matter. So you just kind of, follow that bevel that's already on it. Trick is with that is if you're sharpening that, make sure you get the backside too. So when you're sharpening it, what it will do is it'll burr out a little bit on that backside, and how those run by each other. Right, it'll snag. So I've even seen people use sandpaper on the backside or something. So, just simple things. It'll help you, it'll help your plants. So maintaining lawns and gardens, this is a big one. This one got split into an entire class on its own. And this class is coming up pretty soon, I think. Right, Jason? Lawn care? A couple weeks? Okay. So it depends. There's so many variations on that. Like I said, early spring, if you're doing grass seed and that sort of stuff, early spring is the time to be able to do that, take advantage of those spring rains and stuff. We're starting to get to a point now where it's almost too hot to start that stuff. If you're into the weed controls and all that sort of stuff, there are many, many different ways to be able to deal with that. What I'm going to say is we're going to get into that much more on that class. So if you want to know more about that one, definitely come to that class because we're going to get into a lot of the little nitty gritties. What I like to talk about as far as lawns and stuff like that is the time of the year when the maples start dropping their whirligigs, or it's right about now with us, and the mulberries start growing up and everything else. I don't have an issue with those, except if they're on a fence line. Drives me nuts. So, or right up next to your house. That's another one, So take a look, and see if you have any, I call them weed trees, but trees that you don't want within, 2 or 3 feet of your house. That's a really bad thing. I've seen it where either a tree grows and they haven't pulled it out when it's this big and the roots are about that big. And it's all of a sudden collapsing in their basement or growing up through their soffit or something along that line. So, trees really can do a lot of damage. So, and along the fence lines, whether it's wood or metal, doesn't matter. A lot of times I'm going to say, go ahead and try to clear those out or just keep an eye on them. And sometimes you're going to get mulberries that, maybe this big. Hack the things down if they're in an area you don't want them to be growing. They'll keep popping up, but I just keep hacking. Eventually, they'll go away. Other little tricks you can do, boiling water. That's really simple. Boil water, dump it on there, and almost immediately that thing just and croaks. And you talk about no, pesticides or anything along that line. So like I said, there are always ways to be able to do that. Another thing about the boiling water is, if you have like cracks in your driveway and stuff and you have weeds growing through, you can pour that on. And yes, it'll kill the existing plants that are there, weeds that are there, It'll also pop the seeds that are there and make it so that it's kind of like a sterilizer. Not just boiling water. Yep. Just don't pour it on your foot. I mean, you have to realize if you dump it on the dirt, it doesn't really sterilize the dirt, but it doesn't. What would your take on that be as far as boiling water on that? Yeah. So. Right. Yeah. So, like I said, there's always ways to be able to do that. There are chemical ways to be able to do it, but man, those things are. There's like, yeah, vinegar too. I've heard that one. Vinegar, rock salt. Yeah, I've heard of a vinegar, rock salt, a little bit of dish soap mix, and put it in a pump sprayer and stuff and do that. So there are always ways to get around using some kind of a sterilizer or something along that line. As far as like landscaping, as far as that goes, that is touched a little bit more on lawn care also. When you're putting in plants and whatnot, you want to, the type of plant you put in is whatever you want. But I guess keep this in mind. You have to think about, is it going to grow out of control? So certain things like, Rosa Sharon, they go crazy. There are other types of plants that they look great, but you got to keep them under control. And there are other plants that are not necessarily native, and they can just get totally nuts. I'm gonna pick on you and say that's something she knows more about right there. So, but you want to kind of keep that in mind. You also want to keep in mind as far as where you're planting them. A lot of people will, they'll think about, okay, full sun, part shade, that sort of stuff. Great. They'll put the plant in, but they don't think about those winter winds, whether this plant needs to be protected, or is it, do you have a building that's going to cut down on that wind that's going to be whipping across, or is this a plant that you're going to need to, wrap with burlap come wintertime to be able to protect it? So details like that, if you're putting those plants in, as I said, talk to your garden centers. They can really be helpful with that. Yeah.
If you have a large plant,
Yep.
shouldn't you call Miss Dig first before you dig a hole?
You should. Yes, you should. Yep.
Can you repeat that question?
So calling Miss Dig before you're digging a big hole for a big plant or something along that line. Yes, you should. Usually they're going to need 2 or 3 days to get out there, and it is free. So at least here, it's free.
So what about the plants that you don't plant? Because like I had 2 flower beds when I moved into my home, and they had, what is it called, perennials or whatever.
Mhm.
It was beautiful, like the purple, yellow, orange would come up.
Yep.
But then like within like 5 years, these worms or whatever they were just start growing, overgrew everything. Lots of sun, killed those, growing out in the grass. I had people coming by the house asking if they could take some because it was so many. And I was like, yeah, because I'm not ready to burn my house down because I can't stand them.
Yeah.
And stuff. And then like, but I mean, it's just, and I think like last July, I sat out there, it was just like a perfect day where the soil was enough to just pull so many of them.
Yep.
But it doesn't matter. I see they're coming back up, but those were never planted. And
Yeah.
so where did they come from?
Birds are drifting in or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of ways that plants can come in. The question was, what do you do as far as those volunteer plants, I call them, that show up in your beds and stuff? Yeah, I mean, they can drift in. They can be delivered by birds. They can be delivered by squirrels. They can be delivered by a whole bunch of different things. So, and you were talking about annuals and perennials and stuff. And, that's fine. I mean, if you like annuals are, I'm sure you probably know this, but I'll still say it. Annuals are the plants that you plant and they die off in the winter, or they die off in the fall, and they don't necessarily come back. Some come back, some don't, some do. And perennials are those that come back every year. So, yeah, yep, and that's part of that whole thing as far as thinking about what's around. You know, I mean, in our backyard, I have a wild edge, and we have mint. That thing, it's nice, but my wife hates it. It's everywhere. So, and that was just kind of showed up. So, yeah, you know, think about all that sort of stuff. We sort of touched on fencing as far as keeping track of, you know, kind of what's growing around it, near it, next to it, all that sort of stuff. You want to take a look at it and, you know, see if there's any repairs that need to be done, whether it's chain link or whether it's wood. Like I said, spring's the time to be able to do that. You want to keep in mind if it is a wood structure, wood fence, you may want to think about using some kind of a stain that has a UV blocker in it. And you've all seen the wood that is grayed out and starts to splinter and sort of looks like handles of your tools, right? A lot of that is UV damage. So, you know, some people, they don't necessarily want to, you know, add like a colored stain to their fence or something, but you can still get a clear something that has a little bit of UV protection from that sun, and it's not going to degrade that wood quite as fast. It will add quite a few years to that, and you can get it in clear, you can get it in some kind of a stain color, translucent, whatever. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do with that. On that note, too, you know, if you have a deck or you build a deck, getting that sealed up or stained. The thing to keep in mind with that is if you have some kind of a horizontal surface that you're going to be walking on, make sure it's deck stained. I've seen that happen I don't know how many times where people go out and they just go, oh, they're stained, that's cheap, and they grab it and it's fence stained. It's not meant to be walked on, right? And then they put it out on their deck. Looks nice for about 10 minutes, and then so understand what it is that you're putting it on. But again, you know, it's gonna really make those wood surfaces last longer. I won't say how long I haven't stained my deck. I need to do it. All right. So, you know, you know, if you have older wood that you want to do that to, you know, you can get it washed up. You know, if you have older wood that is really darkened up and whatnot, there are things out there that you can put on it to be able to get it back to that blonde color. It's a deck wash, that sort of thing. So it doesn't necessarily deal with mold and mildew. So sometimes you have to do 2 or 3 different treatments on it, depending on, you know, the situation you have. You can power wash it if you want. Just be real careful, because don't let your kids do it, because I have a Desi was here that I can see when the sun hits just right on my deck, because I let my daughter with a power washer. And yeah. So you have to be careful of that one as far as if you're going to be using that. You don't want to raise that grain up so much that it's a constant reminder of what you did before. If you have new lumber, treated lumber, it has that green tinge to it. It's meant for, you know, exterior applications. There are, again, that deck wash or deck brightener. What it will do is it'll pull that green tinge out of it, especially if you're going to be using like a semi-translucent stain, and you don't really want that green background on it. You can use deck brightener or something along that line. It will blonde up that wood and then make it so that you can put whatever color on it. You're not dealing with that, and it doesn't necessarily affect the treatment on that wood. So I will say sometimes especially if you're doing like a repair. So let's say you have a deck and you have deck boards and, you know, they're cracked or something along that line. You need to replace a few, right? Now it's time to, you know, go after that. The issue is that if you stain that, you're going to have 2 different colors, especially if you have brand new right next to old. the old is going to suck up that stain much, much more than that new. So sometimes that's just the way it is. Some people will let their new, if they have a newer deck built, they may let it weather just a little bit, like maybe a season or something, so that it actually takes that stain. Or if you do stain it, realize that it's going to be a little off. It just doesn't want to soak it up quite as much. And sometimes that boils down to just how much moisture there is actually in new lumber. So keeping all that in mind. As I said, if you're talking to, a good paint center and stuff, they'll be able to help you along with those sort of things, as far as whether you're using an oil base or something along that line. But yeah, you can make that deck last much, much longer. Even you can see that deck over there where that's kind of like a clear stain they use, like a Thompson's or something. And it might have a little bit of color to it, but it makes it really last quite a long time. So you have solid color stains, all sorts of things. Another thing that you can do is if you have paint on your house. Anybody have like a house they actually have to paint? Yeah, a few of us. So yeah. So if you're needing that done, what you're going to want to do is, and this is painting class. We talk about this a lot more than that. Is go through and remove that loose paint. But the good part about all that is old homes, you got to think about lead. Oh yeah, the asbestos siding. Yeah. So yeah, and I mean you can't really tell if it's asbestos unless it's tested. You had it tested.
They were going to replace the front door,
Mm-hmm.
but he said, I would have, well, the home, but he said
Okay.
I would have to get something else because it's got asbestos.
So yeah. So yeah, the thing with asbestos is if it is asbestos, it's one of those things where if it's left alone, it's fine. If it's not degrading, it's fine. But if you're having to cut it, then you have issues. But the thing with that is someone can come up and say, most likely that's asbestos. If they say that's definitely asbestos, I would be a little leery of that. Because there is really no way to tell unless you send in a sample to be tested out.
They had told me too that because of the year that the house was built, because it also comes out that they passed that whatever for the insurance companies that they don't insure homes with asbestos anymore. So you have to
Get it removed.
So then I found out that if I want to sell it, I have to either take a bite if somebody else had it cleaned it up, or do aluminum siding because
And put it over the top of it. Yeah.
That's my person told me don't sell it and don't try to sell, don't move or whatever because there's no guarantee. And make sure I find out if it's asbestos because the insurance companies don't. They're not doing it anymore. You have to be grandfathered in.
Yeah, that would be one of those. Come to whenever they have the insurance class. That'd be a good one to ask those questions about because that's a new one on me. I have not heard that one. So, but yeah, like I said, if you have wood siding, that sort of stuff, and you want to paint that, and you want to get that painted, do keep in mind that normally you have to scrape it down and stuff, and get it down to the bare wood or all the loose paint and stuff, and then prime it, and then use a caulk or something that can accept paint for the gaps and whatnot, and then go ahead and paint it. But keep in mind that if you have an older home, later in 1976, there's a good chance that you got lead in that paint. And again, it's one of those things where it can be really tricky. So, and lead is just one of those nasty things that you have to kind of keep in mind, especially with those older homes. If you think you might have it, yes, you can get it tested. They have the little self-do-it kits, where you break a vial and you rub it against the paint, and if it turns red, it's lead. Does it say how much it is or concentration? No, but at least it gives you that idea. And if you think you have that issue, what I'm going to say is, and don't take this as how to do it, I'm just going to give you a little quick advice on that, is lay down some kind of a plastic, and when you go to scrape, before you scrape, use a pump sprayer with water and a little bit of dish soap in it and spray the area you're going to scrape down. That soap helps it bind a little bit. It makes it so that when you're scraping it, yes, it falls onto that plastic, but it's not going up into the air and stuff. So, and you don't really want it in the dirt either, because over time that's going to build up in that soil. So painting your house can be also fun with an old home. So keep all that in mind. We'll get away from that one. Screen repairs, isn't that another class? Yeah, there's another one. See? Hey, what do you know? So getting those screens repaired up, it is very easy to do. It's a lot easier than you'd think. Let nature provide the air conditioning and not using your air conditioner necessarily, right? Especially if you can't open those windows, you're not suffering from allergies and everything else. So getting those screens repaired. The visual inspection is a big one, as far as what has happened over the winter. A lot of things can happen. We had that ice storm that came through here, took down a lot of limbs. And sometimes it's a visual inspection on your trees. You may have snapped limbs that weren't necessarily cut off. If you have that and it's a tree you actually want to keep, you may want to get that limbed up and put like a pruning sealer on it and stuff. But again, it depends on the tree. There are certain trees that you don't do that in the middle of the summer, like an oak tree, if you don't want it to croak. So those kind of inspections as far as winter damage. Other winter damage is damage to your roof, damage to your gutters. If you have that sort of damage, you want to look at that and get that repaired. We talk about this in gutter class quite a bit as far as, how to deal with your downspouts or your extensions or whatever, and how to make it so that they're actually holding on the way they need to hold on and being able to do the job they need to be able to do. On gutters, if you didn't get to those gutters as far as cleaning them out last fall, yep, you want to get onto it as soon as you can in spring, because again, if those gutters are just nothing more than a big long planter along the side of your house, they don't do much good. They actually cause more damage than they do well. So getting those gutters cleaned out, and if you want to put in some kind of a gutter guard system or something along that line, or screens or whatever, there's a lot of things that you can be able to do to be able to make those gutters last longer. Yep. You can. Yep. We talk about that. You can get in there and cut them out and stuff like that. So we really get into that in gutter repair class, and we talk about the vinyl gutters and all that sort of stuff too. There's pros and cons to all that. So, as far as, working on your house or, doing any kind of repairs along that line, you also want to keep in mind that your roof is one of those that if you have shingles or whatever, a lot of damage can be caused over the winter to your shingles. And most of the time that boils down to ice damming. We used to live right over here in Edison, and we had this old house built in 1910. And what happened is that right in this one valley, we had so much heat loss that this massive icicle, and this thing was probably 300 pounds, right? And it was late winter or whatever you want to call it, early spring. And that ice had formed around the shingles. It had actually grabbed onto the shingles like this, right? And it was one of those days where, you know, it was freezing cold in the morning, and by, you know, mid-afternoon it's 70 degrees. It's one of those typical Michigan crazy things. And this 300-pound chunk of ice comes flying off, bangs into the car, you know, all this sort of stuff. And we're like, oh, and we're cleaning it up and stuff. And yep, and right there in the ice was all those shingles that it grabbed and put down. So, you know, it's details like that, you know. You know, if you're out working in your yard and you're seeing pieces of shingles and stuff, you may want to start looking at your roof a little closer. Sometimes you have to back way up to be able to look. Sometimes it might be a neighbor. You tell them, hey, you know, you got problems. So those visual inspections are really important because, like I said, we get into that rainy season, and you know, we talk about this also in different classes as far as knowing when you have that missing shingle or, you know, that big limb that may have fallen onto your roof. You're talking about limbing trees and stuff. You know, if you have trees that have over the years grown and they're rubbing up against your shingles or something along that line, get those things trimmed back because they will damage your roof. And then all of a sudden you have a lot more issues. So, as far as all this work that we're talking about usually requires ladders. So I'll touch on ladder safety real quick. So you have, I'm trying to think of a good spot to go. I'll go here. So I'll pick on a step ladder. Most of the time, this is what people have. So step ladders are great. Basically, 3 different styles out there. You have the old wood style. That's fine. You have fiberglass, which this is, and then you have your aluminum. Aluminum's really light. If you have an old wood step ladder, there's nothing wrong with it. Remember that linseed oil trick I was talking about? You can do that with that too. On the wrong side, watch it a little bit. But, you know, you want to do a quick inspection. You know, are those rungs in good shape? Are the sides in good shape? You know, is it cracked? Is it splintered? That sort of thing. You know, if it's wood, maybe it's just dry, but everything else is solid. Great. Are all the connection points in good shape? You know, when you open it up, it shouldn't wobble all over the place, right? Are the lock arms in good shape? Do they lock down? Have they been bent? You know, are these parts in good shape? So it doesn't matter if it's aluminum, wood, anything along that line. You want to always do a quick inspection on those. As far as the step ladder itself, step ladders are just that. They are not meant to be leaned. So you see a lot of people that will, you know, they may have a taller step ladder and they fold it up and they lean it up against the side of the house. And technically, that's not correct. That is one of those things that you should be using, one of those extension ladders, which we'll get to in a minute. So, you know, a lot of times when we talk about, you know, if you buy a ladder new, great. There's a rating on the side, and of course it's on the other side because I didn't put it up right. So there's a rating on the side. This is a 225 pounds. And people go, oh, I only weigh 150. I'm fine. You have to think about what you're going to be carrying up that ladder also. That's total weight. That's just not the person. So, you know, you always want to look at that and think about what it is you're going to be using it for and stuff. Usually that's fine for most people, but there are some big guys out there. And so you want that weight rating to be correct. The other thing you want to think about when you're working with a ladder is how, well, like me, I'm really short, and it stinks because a lot of times I can't really reach. You have to think about this is not a step and this is not a step. So you have to think of it as, how can I reach off of this one right here? So, you know, when you're crawling up that ladder, you know, ideally, I'm going to hit something. You know, that's your extent right there. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. And as I said, they sell all different lengths, 4-footers up to 12-footers, you know. So you want to keep that in mind. As far as the ladders themselves, They react differently. Wood is probably the most stable as far as what we're going to be talking about next. Aluminum is probably the worst, and fiberglass is somewhere in between. What happens is, and you might not be able to see this, what it does is those front two legs will kick out a little bit. Usually the taller the ladder, the more that's going to happen. And what happens is when you move, that ladder starts doing this, right? So what you want to do is, if you have a step ladder like that, 1 or 2 steps, grab this, pull it back a little bit, and it'll level out those legs. You know, it's usually if you're on a somewhat even surface. So, I'll get up there and I'll pull that back a little bit. And then I step up one more and I just do this just to make sure that that's not kicking one way or kicking the other, right? Because I've seen it where people walk up these things and that front leg just goes and down they go. So keeping that all 4 legs or all 4 feet flat on whatever surface. The other thing is you have to think about how you're going to be working on it. And what I mean by that is, ideally you're working off to your right or off to your left or this way. You don't want to do this. You don't want to ever be working on a ladder like this and trying to do this sort of thing. Never work backwards on them. Sometimes you have to get a little creative as far as how you set them up. You also, when you're on a step ladder like this, generally I'll say, watch your belly button. If your belly button gets out of this zone, your center of gravity is now over. And if you need to have somebody hold that ladder, fine. But you have to keep that in mind, is the more you lean, the more you're apt to go over. So, sometimes you need somebody to be able to hold that ladder. And this is another funny one. So I've seen it where people on a ladder and I'm like, oh, I got you. And they hold it like this. Well, if that ladder starts going over, you think this person's going to stop it from going this way or this way? No, it's just going to go over and they're probably going to fall over too. So, if you're holding that ladder for somebody, if it looks like it's wanting to lean this way, go on this side or the other side, whatever side it's wanting to lean. Sometimes you have to do a little digging or whatever in the yard to be able to make that sit flat. Ladder injuries are no joke. It's one of those things that, if you treat it nice and you understand some of those basic things, fine. If the ladder is damaged, like I said, they all have their quirks. Wood rots, aluminum's light and likes to fold up easily. Fiberglass over time gets a little brittle. So like I said, pick your poison sort of thing. But if that ladder is damaged ever, and you need to throw it away or set it out by the road, don't just set it out, because somebody will come along and get it and hurt themselves. What I do with a dead ladder is I'll cut it off right here with like a Sawzall, just then no one can use it. And it's not going to hurt, the next person that picks it up on junk day, right? So, or those scrappers that will come pick it up. So, like I said, the step ladders are great. They come in all different heights and everything else. There's a lot of little details you got to think about. So you treat them right and they'll last quite a long time. As far as extension ladders go, does anybody have extension ladders? Okay. So I don't have an extension ladder, but I can use this as kind of imagine this is an extension ladder. So, a lot of times when people have those, they don't set them up right. And what I mean by that is, and I'm trying to think of a good spot to go where I can show that angle. I'll just do it here. Can you guys see this sort of? So let's say this is an extension ladder, right? And they're leaning up against whatever. The first thing is you want wherever that is leaning up against, or it's a roof line or gutter or something along that line, you want that to extend a good at least 2 feet past. There's a couple of reasons for that. If that ladder decides to slip out, that bottom kicks out or something like that, it gives you a little bit of play. versus, you're just right on that edge and that bottom kicks out and then you're taking a ride. It happens quite a bit. There was a fire, I don't know however many years ago, and there was a firefighter threw a ladder up against the thing and running up it, and he only had about that much leaning on that, and that bottom kicked out, and he went. So keep that in mind. So let that, wherever it's leaning, at least have a couple feet. I like about 3. Another reason is that if you, for some reason, you're getting up onto something, it's a lot easier to get down because you can actually, when you're up there, you can actually grab that ladder. You got something up here, and you can flip your ankle around, and you're not doing this sort of thing where you're like trying to get down, like a cat in a tree. So the other thing is that once you get it placed, if you have means to be able to secure that ladder so it's not going to fall one way or the other, right? And it could be something as simple as a heavy bungee cord or something along that line, or nails on the side or something, just something that's not going to want to do this and fall over and leave you stranded up on the roof. As far as I can use this. As far as the lean goes, and this is where a lot of people get confused with this, and you'll hear a bunch of different things as far as this and lean. What I found over the years, the easiest way to do it is, you go ahead and you lean your ladder. And what I do is I'll put my feet right up against the base. And I put my arms out. If I'm doing this sort of thing, that ladder's too steep. And when I walk up it, I'm just going to fall backwards, right? If it's too much angle and I can't really reach that, there's a good chance your bottom's going to kick out, right? So, it's a basic rule, but most of the time, if you can put your arms out and easily grab it, and you're not doing this sort of thing, you're not stretching too hard, that's usually a pretty good angle. It is a good idea that if you're, depending on the surface that you're going on, move this stuff over. Wow, I got 5 minutes. Depending on the surface that you're going on, with extension ladders or these, with extension ladders, you have your rubber feet. And those are meant for solid surfaces. It's asphalt, concrete, that sort of stuff, right? If you're on soft surfaces, they have those prongs that flip out. You've seen them on the sides, on the feet. They flip out and they have little, it's been a long day. Prongs that will dig into the dirt and make it so it's not going to kick out on you, right? So use those if you're on soft surfaces. If you're in a situation where you think that bottom may want to kick out, I've seen a lot of creative ways to be able to deal with that. Sometimes it's just a buddy that's sitting here and keeping their legs on it so that it's not going to want to kick out. Sometimes it's getting a nice long crowbar and hooking it around that bottom thing and driving it into the dirt so that it gives you a little bit of extra grab. So it's just some of those basic things to be able to think about. And you can YouTube these. It'll talk about a whole bunch of different safety things. But the other is usually when people get hurt is when they have a tall extension ladder. They don't know how to control it when they're bringing it down or moving it. So again, imagine this is, a good 20 feet up in the air. So the trick with this is instead of trying to pick it up and go like this, you're going to lose because you got all that leverage above you and it's just going to take you down. So if you're moving a ladder like that, obviously you want to look around, make sure you don't have electrical lines or something like that. I'll walk that ladder out to an area where I can lay it down. I'm keeping it upright. And then what I'll do is if I want to bring this ladder down, if I'm by myself, I'm going to brace it up against something that fit that bottom. Or if you have a partner, they can kind of put their feet against it. And then what you want to do is make sure you have clearance behind you. Again, you have to use your imagination a little bit, but what you do is you walk this back and you just lower that ladder like that. You get it down to a point where you can rotate it, find that center point in that ladder, and be able to carry it very easily. Or carry it with a partner or something along that line. That's usually where people get hurt. as far as they try to move it in the incorrect way. And to me, that seems to have worked the best over the years. So just that walking backwards and making sure you're not going to hit something as you come down. Nice way to be able to move that ladder. And a lot of times too, you know, if you don't want to walk it and you're feeling strong, you can grab it like this, and when you move it, you can pick it up and walk this way with it if you have one of those long extension ladders. Again, keeping your eye on what's going on above. You don't want to come in contact with a power line or something. So ladder safety is one of those big ones. We got a couple minutes left. I'm going to touch on one other thing. I talk about weatherization. We have a whole class on that one. A lot of people don't think about that weatherization as far as summertime work, because they're like, well, that's wintertime. I want to keep the heat in. Well, who has air conditioning here? A few of us. All that weatherization works just as well with keeping your well-earned air conditioning inside your house, right? So, you know, if you have areas where it was really cold last winter, I noticed a draft here and a draft there, you can use things like expanding foam or caulk or whatever, and you can really cut down not only your heating bill, but your cooling bill also, just by some of those quick, simple things that you can do as far as penetrations into the house, bad weather seals, that sort of stuff. Don't think of that as just it's starting to get cold sort of mentality. It's a year-round thing, you know, if you're using that AC. So I think that summertime is a great time to be able to do that. Is there any questions? No? We're done. Huh? Insulation? Yeah, it's a weatherization class, right? Yeah, yeah. We talk about that. But again, you can see how this class got broken up into so many different things. So, all right. I can keep going, but we're out of time.
I know that you can keep going, and we absolutely appreciate your endless information. I wanted to take the opportunity to thank everyone that attended the class in person, and also all of our participants that are online. Want to encourage you to visit us on Tuesdays. You can find us at 812 Bryan Street. We'd love to see your face in the place. If that is it, we will say good night.
Good night.